Welcome to another episode of Saga Media Podcast. And it's Jeremy and I today, the actual founders of this particular podcast. We're teaming up because Jeremy happens to have a background in microgrids and energy. And I thought it'd be good to dig into a little bit about microgrids and what they are, how they impact all of us. And so I have a couple of questions for Jeremy, but tell me a little bit about your background, how you're connected with microgrids.
So one of my companies, we are energy developers, and we develop industrial commercial sites. A number of years back, as we were going through and sourcing out projects and we were looking at opportunities, we saw that there was a need for large-scale power that wasn't available from the public utility and or would take a long time for that power to be able to be delivered to a specific site for an end user. End user could be a technology park with data centers, crypto mining, or heavy using energy manufacturers, distribution, like mini steel mills. Another one would be like semiconductor. We've dealt with the chip shortage in recent years. So what we've uncovered is, as we're developing this out, about 10 years ago, a lot of coal-fired power plants were decommissioned. New gas-fired power plants are starting to become minimal. There's a transitional shift between large-scale solar and renewables and wind, and there's a backlog of new projects because of that transition. So we uncovered that we needed to be, we need to be able to provide energy, or these companies aren't going to come. And if we develop these sites, they're just not going to be there. Our background, obviously, we've been in the natural gas industry for quite some time. And so having that background of natural gas development, heavy construction, my other business partner is affiliated with me in this. He's got 65 years of heavy construction under his belt. So they've done power plants, steel mills. I incorporated that into my businesses when I joined with him years ago. So it really came down to us both having an energy background, but as developers seeing that the need in the marketplace was for additional energy. And so that's kind of where this all started a number of years ago, and we've kind of ran from it, I'd say, about the last 6-7 years.
So what is a microgrid? This is just like, you're telling me from what it sounds like, it's not a main power plant, but it helps. It's a smaller distribution from that. And so are there many microgrids outside of this major power plant? Is that what it is?
Well, it's sort of, yes.
What does it look like? If I look at
if you were looking at, say, like an industrial site, a microgrid is pretty much a smaller power plant would be the best way to put it in layman's terms. So instead of it a large-scale gas-fired power plant or a coal plant having to come through the main transmission lines and the public utility, a specific, say there was an old steel mill site, okay, that had been shut down for years. The steel mills were torn down, and developers come in years later looking to develop that said site. Well, generally there is power that can be available and reconnected from the public utility, but it just takes a really long time because of the backlog that I just mentioned. So what a microgrid is you can utilize natural gas, for example, from the pipeline, or gas wells that are in close proximity, and you could feed smaller gas-fired gen sets. Or you can even do a hybrid approach where you do a solar farm, and a solar farm can feed a microgrid. What that does is that provides power for that said site. So say you have 100 acres, former steel mill site, we're going to develop it. We can utilize these smaller gas-fired gen sets and or a solar farm and smaller solar, and combine them to create electricity for that site. Now that site will have its own power supply. So then if like a new mini steel mill or a data center or something like that, crypto mining operation wants to come on, we can provide them redundant power on their site and essentially island them off. And there's many different versions of being able to do that, and reasons that we would want to do that as well.
What are ways to develop microgrids? What's the first thing you do to get one going?
So first thing you do, obviously, identify the sites and what the end users need. And this, again, can also be on current buildings and structures. It doesn't have to be on new development into industrial sites. So, for example, other areas that this can help out would be like hospitals. They can have their own power supply and this and that. But like how you would do that is, I have a gas pipeline that happens to run into a specific site. We identify that site. As long as that gas pipeline isn't 5 miles away where we have to run another line, if we have gas that's to that site, we can utilize that gas. Smaller gen sets that can provide 1 megawatt, 5 megawatts, up to 20 megawatts. The gas feeds those gen sets. and then you step down that through transformers and whatnot to step down onto the site, and then that provides that electricity, and then your end user, once they build, connects right to it, and then they have their own source of redundant power supply, feeding it from clean natural gas and or like a solar farm.
So as I moved to Pittsburgh, I started seeing, it's probably in the 80s, steel mills shutting down and then redeveloping into multiple office buildings. Switch and Signal went down. It's now a strip mall, a bunch of different areas. How does can when you do that, does it help the community at all? I mean, is it just for that area, or can a microgrid actually help people around? How does it benefit a community?
So it can benefit a community in many ways. As I said, you're providing your own redundant power source, but where it gets is on a site like that, say it's just a commercial with office and, an older industrial site that got redeveloped into, say, like condos, restaurants, things. That site there can also have its own power supply, but where it actually benefits the end users on site. So if you are providing, say, 20 megawatts of power and your site only needs 10, that additional revenue in power can be sold back into the grid. So then you're supplying the outside world, or at least in their local region, their own additional power. It's helping the grid, so you're not straining the main power grid. Plus, that cost savings can be passed on to your users on that site, whether that's the office buildings, whether that's a data center, technology park, or another heavy manufacturer. That helps the savings to keep them profitable in their long term and keeps their energy costs low. Plus, for the environment, I mean, when you're doing it from clean natural gas and or solar, I mean, those are good areas that you're able to in sectors that are good for the environment. Plus, again, if you're building out these larger, older industrial or commercial sites, it's less strain on the major power grid wherever area you lie into. So you're providing your own power source and not having to take that might need for new residential areas down the way, and or if you're selling that power back into the grid, that's available power for, say, like new home builds and other commercial development as well.
So when you find a spot, what are you looking for in that location that makes it optimum for a grid? In some places, I'm sure you can't just put a grid there, even though you'd like to. But how do you look at a spot and say that's good?
Well, it comes down to resources around. So close proximity to gas pipeline. On a solar farm, you want to make sure that you have the available space. Just because solar, the difference between them and putting up gas gensets is the gas gensets can be put in a very small place and provide an abundance of more power than a solar farm can. Solar farm needs a lot of space. So I do need space. I need sunlight for that, obviously. So even if you're in a cloudier area like Pittsburgh or a sunnier area like Philadelphia, where those are positioned as well. If you're tucked into a valley, that's not going to help. So you want to be able to have like hillside property for that, or a good flat space that catches a lot of sun. Having the availability to even if it was a disconnected substation. So the substations are the larger, you'll see when you drive by, you see all the transformers and they're fenced in. That's generally when the main transmission lines are coming from a large power plant as they're getting passed on. That's kind of your midpoint entry point.
So that's not a microgrid.
No, it's not. That's a substation.
Substation, that's what, yeah. Okay.
Yep. So those are where your transformers are, and then you pass that power on to the next one. It's how it steps down off of that main generation. But having that close proximity or to a site, because generally if it's an old, say, steel mill site, that substation was there feeding power to that steel mill because they use a lot of electricity. They don't just take those out. So after they disconnect them, they're still there. Having that availability is another option, because in where we look at these sites, it's a value to us, because now if I want to sell power back into the grid, now I have a direct connect back in once I reconnect that sub. Other areas would be, water sometimes is good to help, because if you're getting a data center on site, they need water. So having the availability to have water access off of either a lake or a river with like a pump station and a cleaning facility that cleans that water, that's really big for us. And then having rail service nearby, because if you're getting heavy manufacturing on there, having a rail line that's on the site, next to the site, or nearby really helps out for transportation, depending on, if that's a iron or metals or specialty metals, they want to be able to ship that out. And having rail is a really good benefit for us as well.
So if I'm driving around Pittsburgh and how would I recognize that a microgrid is going up? Are there projects going on now that I'd say, oh, there's a microgrid going on? What does it look like?
So they're hidden. They like to hide, because they dress it up. But if you see a large scale solar farm next to, say, an airport, so for example, Pittsburgh International Airport, it's a great project that they did. About 5 or 6 years ago, they had announced that they were going to do a revamp of the airport, big remodel, a lot of updates. One of them was a microgrid, and they happen to have a lot of excess land next to the airport. So about 10 years ago or so, they had drilled some natural gas wells on that property. That gas now is feeding about 5 gas gensets, plus they built solar farms. So if you see a large solar farm next to an airport or a large prison or a jail or a large hospital or an industrial site, say like a U.S. steel mill, for example, if you would happen to see, that would be signs of what a microgrid. They're generally taking that power.
That's one element, is a solar panel, because that's the most visible.
That would be your most
Is there
visible.
something that's not visible?
The gas gensets generally
Yeah.
are hidden off. They're usually encased in some kind of building, steel building, and they like to dress it and put bushes around and make it look nice. But that airport project is a model project that they did, because what that did for the airport was they originally wanted to build that microgrid there because of a potential grid meltdown, and in case of that, they didn't want to have the airport shut down. That was their
So that can work independent of the actual
absolutely,
grid. Okay.
absolutely. So they're on their
For
own.
how long? How long could that last?
As long as they possibly need, because
Really?
yeah,
Because the solar is renewable. And
solar is renewable, and the natural gas is there for the next 60 to 100 years minimum. So,
is it a drill on site, or is it?
It's on a property. It's right next to their
Okay.
site, so they own the property.
So the natural gas is in the property there. So they
Yes.
got whatever's under that property is theirs for energy for however long it lasts.
So in the region where they are, we have the shale gas. So Marcellus
Gotcha.
shale and the Utica gas. It's a rock formation and it generally lies anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 feet down is your Marcellus shale, typically. And then Utica is obviously below. And there's multiple other layers of shale, but within that shale rock is trapped natural gas. So when the E&P companies come in, the exploration companies that do this for a living and they drill those wells, then they can get that natural gas out and ship it right, across the field there, and it goes into these gas gensets. So the airport is powered on its own site because of that. They generate about 24 megawatts of power consistently. They are islanded off, so the whole airport plus their 2 hotels have their own power source. Now they are still connected to the grid, and they are able to sell about 10 megawatts of power. So as they move forward in this project, a few of the companies that they, like consultants and modeling companies and engineering firms and whatnot, found that this is not only giving you your own power source for not security, this is and redundant power, this is giving you a revenue stream and savings cost. So they're saving about $1 million a year now by doing this, and because they can sell the power back into the grid. So it's a profitable way. And so,
So they don't really need to be a part of the normal grid, or they are. The normal grid is maybe the backup. But they can be completely cut off if they want to, but they're not, because they can sell back.
Yeah, their connection that's still there is because they're selling back into the grid.
So basically, they're not only backing up their own power, they're creating a revenue stream for themselves because they're their own power plant and they don't need all of that. So not only is it backup, it's that. I see what you're saying. Okay, good.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of and where this is moving forward, because there is a lot of opposition against large scale, obviously coal fire plants. I personally don't see any coal-fired power plants being commissioned and permitted ever again in the United States. Now, time will tell, obviously, when it comes down to if they really need power, or if we have a global conflict where power is needed immediately, they might. But natural gas-fired power plants, they actually commissioned the highest percentage in 2018. But since 2018, it's significantly dropped due to solar farms, wind coming online, and it getting pushed ahead of gas-fired because there is opposition. So because these large-scale power plant projects are either not being shut down, or the companies are just taking too long because of lawsuits and environmental groups, this is a good way to still be able to provide the necessary power for not only redundancy for an airport, or another project would be the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard.
Right.
They are on a microgrid. I think it's about 10 megawatts. But hospitals, jails can use this. But for growth, we're seeing a trend of reshoring of jobs. It started around 2017, 2018. And just in 2022, Ohio reshored, I believe it was about 26,000 jobs, and a lot of it in manufacturing coming from Germany, Europe. And so the reshoring of manufacturing is coming back, and these companies need additional power that's just not available. So the microgrid technology gives availability to provide power sooner, because these large scale power plant projects are, a lot of them are kind of, they're not going through and they're being shut down, and it's just a backlog. This gives a quicker time response to be able to provide that power. Plus, it is good for the environment because you are using clean natural gas with like renewable like solar, and on top of that, you're not putting a strain on the public utility. So as housing developments grow, they're going to be reliant on the public utility generation and supply. So this gives the availability that, yes, we are being able to develop this industrial site, bring this heavy manufacturer and or a large scale data center who's very energy. They use high energy data centers, crypto miners, AI with the development of
Yeah.
AI, all this. They need this kind of energy. And so it's a win-win in multiple ways because it's a shorter time frame to be able to get permitted. You can do it in smaller blocks. It's profitable because you can sell it back into the grid, and you're not putting a strain on the public utility. Plus, environmentally, if done in the proper hybrid space, it's a no-brainer because it's clean energy, and it's providing abundance and jobs and growth.
So what about reshoring? What is that about microgrids? How do we handle that?
So where those two come hand in hand is there was a big emphasis under the Trump administration with reshoring jobs and bringing manufacturing back, because over the course of when the steel mills closed down and a lot of manufacturing went out of business, and so or at least overseas, China it took the lead, India took a lot of it, so there has been a big number of reshoring of jobs that have come over. And to give you some statistics, Pennsylvania is kind of lacking, and that's where we're trying to fight with PA. But our neighbors are doing really well. For example, the numbers came out at the end of 2022, where 46,000 jobs were reshored in New York, and I believe it was 24 to 25,000 were reshored in Ohio. I mean, even Maryland and collectively and West Virginia beat Pennsylvania. West Virginia had about 7,000, and 8,000 went to Maryland. So where this comes in is, and it was an earlier question you had posed, why microgrids? Where did this idea come from? And so the reshoring of jobs, the necessary power is not available because there is a backlog. Since we fall into the PJM market, it's a coalition of 13 states that interconnect the power. So the power generation out of the power plants, there's a backlog because there's so much solar and wind that has been, applications applied. Where microgrids come in is it helps bring that power available sooner rather than later. And it goes back to everything else we said about, cleaner energy, not taking from the public utility. But these companies, we work in development in many different industries. That's warehousing, we build out for a lot of manufacturing, plastics manufacturing, chemical plants. To the tech industry, again, with AI, data centers, crypto mining is another big one. They need power now. I have requests for 10, 20, 30 megawatts blocks of power that I could put online in 30 days if the power is there. It's not available with the public utility. It just takes too long. And these companies, and we're going to start to lose that momentum with that reshoring of jobs, specifically in the manufacturing industry. And with a lot of the chip shortage that we dealt with, and there's been bills passed through Congress, and the president signed off, where there's billions of dollars available for chip manufacturing to come from Taiwan here. We're dealing with it out west with our warehouses. Microgrids give that opportunity for that. They give the ability to give the independent power, and it gives sovereign power for these smaller communities back. A lot of these communities were decimated when the steel mills left, and so they've been waiting for 40 plus years to get some industry back. Microgrids give the reshoring an opportunity to have power available now. And that's kind of where we've been really putting a big emphasis on, because the opportunity here is now, as a lot of reshoring is coming from like Germany, Europe, and then also the chip manufacturers, battery manufacturers coming from Taiwan because of the conflict there with China. So that's where microgrids come into play, is we can give them power sooner rather than waiting 3, 4, 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you want to when you're looking for a place and identifying for a microgrid, what are you looking for as far as the minimum need? Like an airport needs a microgrid.
Yep.
Would a hospital need it, or would it be an industrial area with a bunch of buildings?
Hospitals, and you are seeing them across the country. Hospitals are, and they're doing a lot for backup supply because that's a security issue for them. Now, the getting into if you can get enough power to sell back into the grid, where hospitals might have challenges is a lot of hospitals are in the middle of a city, whatnot. So like major gas lines aren't really tied in. It's usually the smaller lines that start feeding into the city. But there's plenty of projects out there where a hospital likes to have a microgrid of their own, even on a smaller scale, just in case the public utility would go down. Because I mean, you have you're in the middle of surgery and major power goes down. You want to be able to have backup supply. And what's nice is you have battery storage for that. So you're actually supplying and storing as you utilize this microgrids generating. You can supply backup power. Another one would be like prisons and jails. That's a national. You don't want to have power going out with any kind of prisons or jails, things like that. So it's a necessary project for redundant power for sectors like that: hospitals, jails, prisons, and then again you get into military bases. Like the Philadelphia Naval Yard. I mean, it's a must that they have power at all times.
Good to know.
Yep.
Anything else about microgrids I need to know?
You're going to see a lot more coming up. We're in the process of developing quite a few projects. It's going to provide unbelievable opportunity for the area and growth, and they'll be announced pretty soon.
Good to hear. Thanks, Jeremy. Good information.